This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
This is meeting number 5. So, wow, congratulations. Thank you for being here this long. I don't know that the City Council necessarily thought that when they gave us this charge that we would be here this long, but I think it's good. And I think we have some conversations at the end of the meeting about what we want to do moving forward. So, again, you've seen this slide every single time. It's just a reminder about why you're all here. And again, we're trying to come up with recommendations that promote ownership of the changes to improve the public good. So that, in the end, was the charge of this group. Last meeting, we talked about the draft. We kind of finished up our conversations on the draft, and we looked at all of those proposed brainstorm strategies, and you guys voted. I think I had a slight challenge with my voting strategy, and we'll talk about that hopefully when and if we get to that section, and we may do some additional voting today. But I thought we would quickly start, as we have every other meeting, with a quick question for introductions, again, to remind everyone about who's here, so you're solidifying the people in the room. Today, really just kind of progress to date. We've done a lot of work in 4 meetings, and if you had one word to just, and it's hard, one word about progress is tough. You usually can come up with an emotion, or you can come up with some word, but one word to say, if you think about what you've done for the last 4 meetings, what word did you come up with? So my example is there again. I'm Lisa Giese, I'm the facilitator, and my one word would be engaged. And I could explain that more, like every one of you probably can explain your words more, but just to hold that thought, so engaged. Katie, you want to go next?
Sure, thoughtful.
Okay, introduce yourself, please.
Thanks. I was thinking really hard about my one word.
I know, it's tough. She was being thoughtful about.
Shoot, she picked up.
I'm sorry.
I'm the co-chair of the Healthy Communities High Risk Drinking Prevention Action Team and a health educator at UW Eau Claire.
Thank you. And she's very thoughtful, but she is reflecting on this group being thoughtful. So
I'm Kevin Rosenberg. I'm the chair of the Third Ward Neighborhood Association. I don't really have a word.
No word. Okay, and that's fair. You can pass. Zach.
Zach Arvold with president of CVTC, a student, or I should say that is SGA. And I would say communication.
Okay.
Jed Hart with J&L Corporation Synergy, Pioneer Pickle, Water Street. Excited.
Thanks. Dave, you go.
Dave Olson, Tavern League, communicative, I hope that's a word.
I think it might be. We'll use it. I'll take that. Good.
Brandon
Brandon.
Yates, Eau Claire Student Body President, and improvement.
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Jen Harger, substance use professional for Eau Claire County DHS, dialogue.
Cordy Drexler from the Eau Claire Health Department, collaboration.
You can repeat. It's all right. You can it's perfectly acceptable to repeat words. It's fine.
Chad Hoyard, Eau Claire Police Department, I'm going to say collaborating.
Collaborating. I love it. Janessa.
Vanessa Stronger from the City Attorney's Office, and my word is inclusive. Colleen Smeyer from the Historic Randall Park neighborhood, and the word is beneficial.
Beth Hart, his other half.
Better half.
Water Street, I would say
Progress. Okay.
Alan Bertram of the Eau Claire Fire Department. Mine's real close, I was going to say progressive.
Progressive. Okay, good. Yeah, and that's, so I am hearing words though that aren't like waste, like words that are, why in God's green earth did I come to these meetings? So I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you guys are getting to know each other. So that, I think that's also amazing progress. So thank you for that. We've got tough work today, and I just want to kind of walk through quickly what we're hoping to accomplish. We'll see what we get to, but in the end, we need to, as a group, give some recommendations back to City Council specifically about Public Good Order Ordinance. So the draft of the Public Good Order Ordinance changes that were brought to the council. This is complicated. So there was the original Public Good Order Ordinance, the proposed changes, and now these are changes to those proposed changes you got in an email, along with kind of a summary of what those were. We're going to talk through that to make sure that you see reflected at least some of your feedback. Again, we had individual feedback that we didn't get every single thing in there, but there's a good amount of change to the Public Good Order Ordinance, and we're going to talk through that. We're also going to talk, there's a one-pager that talks a little bit about messaging. We're going to talk a little bit about messaging because at our previous meeting, or maybe meeting number 3, there was really clear discussion that messaging and how we communicate is going to be clearly important. So that's going to be around that specific Public Good Order Ordinance next step. We're also going to talk a little bit about the strategies. So again, we took the votes that everybody came up with, and you see those reflected on the sheet of paper that you got in advance. They are also listed without all the detail on this one-page slide. So we're going to talk briefly about that. And then really try and figure out what we think moving forward needs to happen. Who does what does this group do, if anything, moving forward? Okay, so lots to accomplish. Does that match what everybody thought we were going to talk about today? Yeah.
Question, so the amendment to the amendments or whatever, so who made those, or is that?
We'll talk about, yeah, that's part of what we'll go through next, but yes.
I'm just curious.
Yep, so, and we'll do that right now unless anybody else has additional questions about what we're going to progress through. Does that match? Does that make sense? Okay, and if we can get out of here, that would be great too. So, Katie's question was, how did we come up with this newest draft that you guys landed on? So what happened is all of the notes that you guys have seen from all of these meetings, all the summary, both individual, we didn't really vote on anything during those meetings, but all the feedback that was gathered from everybody went back to city legal, and a team of people at the city reviewed all of that. Janessa worked on redrafting based on that feedback, and the draft you have in front of you is a capture, our best capture at the city level of that feedback. And so what we want to do today is really say, how does that match, and how do people feel about this moving forward? And where, in the end, like we talked about at the last meeting, is the task force really comfortable with this language? Is the task force supportive? What will go forward to the council, the hope is that this task force is behind. Even if you don't like every single word, you in principle are behind it moving forward. So we're going to walk through this is kind of the painful piece of looking at legal language. We're going to walk through the changes, and Janessa's here so she can help us remember the old language. But I want to remind you that what you have is the original ordinance plus a redraft plus a redraft. So what we tried to do is capture on the one-pager about what were the changes made. There's a one-pager with some of those changes. If you want, you can go back to the original. Some of you in your folders will have the struck-through version of the original. I mean, it got so messy to do all the strike-throughs that we didn't do that. So bear with us as we go through section by section. So section A of the Public Good Order Ordinance. So again, this is the purpose statement. We spent a lot of time talking about the purpose statement. There was general agreement that the purpose statement looked good and lots of feedback from people in the group. The language that has changed in the purpose statement based on on this group's feedback was, rather than talking about neighborhood disruption, that we should talk about community disruption. So that was a very explicit point of feedback from the group. So you'll see that under A, it now reads on the fourth line down, community disruption and unrest. Does everybody read that? There were some additional pieces of feedback in the purpose statement, but that is the change that was made in that section. And I'm going to walk through this. I think the easiest way to do it is walk through it, and then we'll take a full 9.5.6050 we'll take as a group, okay, rather than dissecting it line by line. Section B. So again, lots of feedback about the public good order section, and you'll see lots of changes here, strike out changes. So rather than having 6 paragraphs, which was in the original version, it now has 4 paragraphs, and those 4 paragraphs are much simpler. So a lot of the language was simplified in this public good order section based on all of your feedback. Paragraph 3 and paragraph 6, the old paragraph 3 and 6 were removed, and what was added to the new paragraph 1 were some language pieces to try and capture the old language. So under B1 was language specifically about if not using a building for its intended purpose. This was to give some feedback back about some concerns people had about loitering and what was happening in spaces. In section 2, this was where there was a change in moving the old section 6 here, so upon street sidewalks, public places, or in buildings, so kind of the harassing of people in all kinds of places. And then there was some language changes, as you see in section 4, related to gestures, noises. The word unreasonably was added as a specific recommendation to this group. So again, simplified, streamlined, and if you look back at the original ordinance, made this section much shorter and much simpler. Section C had no changes. This was a section that some of the neighborhood association people said, I love this section, and there were no changes made to that. Section D had a number of changes. This is the public excessive intoxication section. So if you walk through this language, you'll see an addition, excessive, clear, and demonstrable language. There's a vulnerable to harm language, which is actually on the second page. Let me make sure I'm reading it correctly. Did I say that right? I'm sorry, vulnerable to harm is on the first page under D. There's language about adding the word public to likely causing a public disturbance. In paragraph D1, which is on the back, the excessive being under excessive influence of alcohol included some additional language that all of you proposed. D2 talks about a public place and the specific language around public place, which was a recommended piece of information. And there was a specific definition around what is a controlled substance and how is that defined. So I'm going to pause. As you see, these are all things that we discussed in groups. It's really hard to wordsmith. It's really hard to capture intent. The goal with this was to capture the language that you guys brought forward, to capture the intent of simplifying some things, and to really focus on the things that were most important. So again, the most important discussion I think that we had, or that I heard you all repeat multiple times, was under D. So the public behavior D, where it's unlawful to be under the influence when, and it's the person is or is reasonably likely to become vulnerable to harm, has caused or is reasonably likely to cause harm to themselves, or is causing or reasonably likely to cause a public disturbance. So it's capturing that plus being demonstrably under the influence of alcohol. So again, it's and it's alcohol and controlled substance, just to be clear. So it's the and word in that sentence that is really called out. So I'm going to pause, and hopefully people had a chance to look at this in advance and look at that whole section, 9.5.6.050, and give feedback about were things captured? Are there things that are still very concerning to you? We'll go on to the second page, the whole transport piece, and talk about that next. Clear as mud, lots of silence. I mean, this is the chance to jump in and say, not right. And I know there wasn't 100% agreement, so Brandon.
I just have a question on the inflatable tubes or floats.
Mm.
So when we talk about like the purpose of this, it's to create like a safe neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
I know if I float down the river, I always need to put it out in my front yard to let it dry.
Sure.
So
We didn't talk about that as a group,
Yeah,
so
I
it
know
never
we
came
didn't.
up, so,
caught that and
Yeah.
thought of it.
okay.
So is it possible to take that out? Because I don't
Mhm.
know how I dry my inflatable tube.
How that threatens safety.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So I'm gonna. So other people's feedback. So inflatable tubes is one of those items that is out in yards as one of the concerns under that section. Does everybody see where we are? Okay. So this is C2. So greater than 24 hours on the exterior of the residence, which shall include but not be limited to front lawns, drives, fire escapes, rooftops. And then it lists chairs, tables, game tables, inflatable tubes, or other items.
Yeah, I mean, it does say greater than 24 hours. I understand that, but I just don't know how that brings cause like public concern of public safety.
Mm-hmm. It's one of those signs to people of concern, but yeah, Helene.
I think that, I don't know that it's public safety, but it doesn't say you can't put them in the side yard or the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And our neighbors, the kids next to us do that, and it's just an attractive thing. It sort of gives the impression that you really live there and care, and you put, like we do, all your icky stuff in the backyard.
Put your icky stuff
So
there.
it dries, or
Yeah,
like putting your laundry in the back and not.
I don't have a backyard.
Don't
I
have a
think-
side yard?
No, I live in like a 212 Fifth Avenue. It's like a townhouse, so I have a front yard, but I don't really have a side yard. I know other college students have that as well, especially if there's like a duplex or something. You know, you don't really, your backyard could be someone else's front yard.
Sure.
All the new ones on Chippewa don't just have a front door, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. So a question about that whether or not inflatables is important as part of the, and again, this is under the broad umbrella of public good order. This is under public behavior that's defined in the way it's defined. Other feedback?
That was my only comment.
Yeah, thanks. No, it's good. It's important, yeah.
I'm against,
Any other feedback on the inflatables? I'm sorry, and we'll get to the next. Yep.
Just one question, can we change the timing to 48 hours?
Do you,
Will it dry? It doesn't dry over, I don't know.
Well, yeah, in 24 hours, I guess it would dry, but the larger question is, I mean, that's something that I think is specific to students, is this inflatable tubes, and it feels kind of punitive on students, and I just don't understand how it plays into the larger question of the public safety, which is what this
okay.
ordinance is discussing.
Is the group comfortable with keeping or removing that, or proposing? We're not keeping or removing anything, but would be a proposal, yes.
You can kind of address why it was put in there for a safety reason, because when we did inspections back in the fall, a lot of them were stored on fire escapes, so they're blocking exits, and they're not just staying there for 24 hours. That's
The storage location.
But isn't that already illegal, putting in a fire escape?
actually, we couldn't find anything that said it wasn't.
Blocking a fire escape? Help us.
What's your, well, having an obstruction probably would, but it's probably in a fire code, but it may not be in the city ordinance.
And it's a removable thing, so it's the ease of it. So,
To me, 24 hours seems reasonable. I mean,
okay.
I put stuff out, I just went on a paddling trip and I laid all my stuff out in my yard when I got home, rinsed it off, let it dry and all that stuff. I only did it for a few hours and it was plenty of time to let it all dry off and put it away.
So I'm hearing, though, that the question is, how does this exactly relate to this ordinance? So, okay.
I think that's my large.
Yep, okay.
I think I would echo that concern, and it's not specific to fire escapes. It's saying front lawns, and I don't know that it's necessarily needing to be within the scope of this to address that.
Yep, again, it doesn't just say front lawns, it's the whole, under that, it's the physical neighborhood. Under C includes multiple things, but, okay, so I'm hearing that. I think, any other comment about inflatable? Otherwise, I'm going to go to Kevin. Okay, you had some feedback.
Yeah, I'm against D.
Okay, against D. So this is this back to the same conversation we had initially, that D as a whole makes you uncomfortable, or you have a proposal? I mean, really, this is core to this ordinance change, is the addition of the public intoxication piece of it.
It's core to the ordinance, and I feel that's why the ordinance was rejected by the community when it was brought forward in the first place. And we haven't done anything. I mean, this is basically the same ordinance here, this D. I mean, we changed some words around, but pretty much it's illegal to be walking around Eau Claire drunk.
No, it's not. So again, going back to we talked about this, I think, at our last meeting pretty extensively, and that's where the "and" language is very, very important. So, and part of this will be in the messaging discussion, but I just want to be clear that there were some changes to try and clarify some language, so just see that. And it's unlawful to enter in a public place or remain in a public place while clearly and demonstrably, so you have to be clearly and demonstrably under the influence, and there's a definition for alcohol and controlled substances. And if you read through that, and that the person is reasonably likely to become vulnerable to harm, that's a new piece, has caused or is reasonably likely to hurt themselves, or has caused or is reasonably likely to cause a public disturbance. So it really is the "and" of that sentence. You have to be demonstrably intoxicated and reasonably likely or causing a problem. So it's the two things together, and that we talked about that numerous times. So I understand, Kevin, that you've expressed some concerns about that. The bigger group, I believe last time we talked through the "and" piece of this at length. So the rest of you give me some feedback about the comfort or discomfort, because this is core to this ordinance being different. Yeah, Helene.
I thought it was well done. I like the word excessive.
That's an addition to the language, just so you guys see that.
Clear. I agree with the messaging and with the word "and." I think I said it last time, perhaps it should be capitalized.
We'd love to, and I asked Janessa again, we can't in ordinance, so we can't capitalize, although I think that we cleaned up some things that the original proposal was going to be a little bit messier, and I'm like, no, keep this as simple as possible. We can't capitalize, but so excessive.
And I also like the addition of being vulnerable to harm,
Yep, that was also a recommendation.
which I never thought about before, but it's important.
Okay. Yep, a lot of this language is subjective, just to be clear.
That's the problem.
Yep, so subjective language is true across all kinds of ordinances, just so we're clear. We're micro looking at this one, but yes, there's subjective language, absolutely. I heard some other comments. I'm sorry that I didn't catch it as I was writing down. Did other people have feedback about this? So if you look at D, there is subjectivity. There was an addition of some language to make it narrower and not as subjective by adding, if you see, that's that whole controlled substance language. And Janessa, tell me if I'm missing something else, because I know that there was...
We added a number of factors in one to really raise the level of intoxication.
Yep.
We added the disorientation, I think that might have been in there, but vomiting, public urination, and incapable of making rational decisions.
So the definition of alcohol, the excessive use of alcohol, it's not someone that's, it doesn't say, even tripping on the road. It's really excessive, and it's defining controlled substance. Those are two things that have narrowed it. Yeah, Jed.
Question, sir, just to, so we're not doubling and tripling up and everything, if you urinate in public now, is there a citation for that? Or is it just DC?
There's a public urination citation.
Okay. So, not me, but my wife is urinating in public. Does she get that citation? Does she get this citation, or both?
You wouldn't get both.
Okay.
So it could be one or the other, but there might be other factors that maybe fall into this one, that this ordinance may be better use for
A better tool.
And it's another tool that we could use for excessive alcohol consumption.
Is there any way we can eliminate the bloodshot or glassy eyes, slurred speech type of thing? I think Kevin asked, go on, I think that, just right there, has got a lot of people just freaked out about the whole thing. It just starts bad after you read those. You know what I mean?
So it's interesting because that's in direct contrast to the request to make this more specific, so it's not so subjective. If we say someone that's excessively under the influence of alcohol but don't define it at all, but we could do that. We could propose that back to City Council and say it makes people nervous if we give a clearer definition. But I think it also made people nervous to not have a clear definition.
You're just saying that a couple of them are problematic.
Right, it just starts, anybody reading it that would be totally against it when they start off with that, they're going, can you believe this?
Okay, so what would be your proposal, Dave? Yeah, because I
I
think,
don't know, Janessa, you got some other words or anything that can fit in there?
Does it help if we lead off with the vomiting and belligerent, like if we start off with
the really extreme stuff? I mean, is the order of the language, that's a great question, is the order of the language important?
Yeah, I think that would probably help.
What is when you look at that language, Dave, what do you think is the worst thing there that would, if you were in a bar and concerned about someone, like if you had to rank order these?
The bloodshot or glassy eyes.
Is the word, you wouldn't put that, again, if you were trying to say
That would
strike that.
And then you're gonna have someone that's gonna say, well, they talk with a lisp, and I know plenty of people that do have slurred speech dead sober. You know what I mean? You're kind of offending that person.
But again, it's the but going back to the and language, so I just want to be really clear that we're talking but you're right. So this number 1 is defining what we mean by excessive influence. So if you go back to D, this is the definition statement for excessive use.
Maybe
So
putting the word combining these things, you got an odor of intoxicant on you. If you spill the beer on yourself, you smell like beer, you know what I mean?
Sure.
You're gonna smell like beer.
Yeah.
yeah, and again, I think part of this is a reasonableness, I don't think that's a word, but a little test. Like, again, if I spill beer on myself and I walk out of the bar, I don't think any of us expect that we're going to get arrested by the police for public good order. It's, again, the combination of factors that raise it up where we're saying this is a risk. That's the point of this. I think we can micro look at language, but
Maybe those words combination of these factors.
okay, so I'm hearing the word somehow using language around combination, somehow maybe switching the order of these words and maybe starting with the most severe thing and going down to the least severe and maybe considering not including some of the most severe language. So I think you were next.
Yeah, I was just saying thing exactly what you said there is like, yeah, it's go from I think the law enforcement standpoint is obviously it's reasonable what they're doing. So yeah, right. I think if you have the worst stuff in there, and then it goes in, and those are added on, then that makes it more probable to what's actually happening. So if you start with those vomiting, urinating in public, and now then they add on, this person also had slurred speech, glassy eyes, all this. These are just added on things that will make it more probable. Because if you have just slurred speech, stuff like that, I think a law enforcement officer should know that if you have been drinking, that is some of the things that are going to come from that. But if the factors that you are excessive drinking is actually going to come from like the vomiting stuff, so it's just more additives. And I like the switching up and stuff.
Okay, so I'm hearing from Dave and from you that thinking about the combination language, thinking about the order language. Am I hearing, though, that having this definition in there was something that this group wanted? They wanted it a little clearer about what we mean by intoxication, and so now one is much more clear about what we mean, but we might want to be careful about the language.
We're still making it clear, we don't have to have bloodshot or glassy
Okay,
eyes.
yep, and
or slurred
slurred
speech in
speech.
there
So
to
those
make it-
specific language items are of concern. Okay, I'm hearing that. And I think, I'm trying to think order. I think, Jen, you were next, and then Brandon. And then Katie.
To include the illicit controlled substances, and I feel like bloodshot and glassy eyes speaks more to that than it does to alcohol.
Mhm.
And it's important to be inclusive of the signs if we're going to be inclusive of the substances.
Yeah, so number 3 just captured controlled substance as defined as those substances which are included. It doesn't really look at the behavior piece. So I think that is one of the questions that I think we can look at is how are we looking at behaviors related to alcohol versus other controlled substances? Brandon, did you have an additional comment
Yes.
about this?
I guess I have more of a question.
Mhm.
So if, for the first part of the and, how do you, I still don't understand how you prove someone is demonstrably under the excessive influence of alcohol. Because if I get the citation, then what if the next day I'm like, wow, that's bogus, I was not under the excessive influence. Like, how does that stick to the person if they want to fight it? Because then isn't it the officer's word versus the...
Right. They'll be documenting, if it's alcohol, they'll be documenting what they see in number 1 on the backside. So if you look at D, the first half of the and would be documented by number 1 or number 3. The second half of the and would be, again, documented by some obvious documentation related to this person appears vulnerable to become vulnerable to harm, has caused harm to themselves, or is reasonably likely to cause a public disturbance. I think it's up to, again, the goal is that we don't have any of these citations, that this is a preventive measure, but it would be up to the officer. I think you're right, Brandon, that documenting evidence of this will be, it's going to be what it is, and that will be part of legal's challenge to figure out how it moves through.
And my last comment on D, just from what I'm hearing from a lot of the group I'm representing is like,
Yeah.
so I feel like I can be drunk at my house, I can be drunk at the bar, I can't be drunk in between, and by the way, we're taking away, and I know this ordinance didn't take away the blue bus, but a lot of people in the town believe that, so they're thinking, okay, this ordinance took away the way I'm gonna get home, and now I can't get home under the influence.
So again, part of this is going to be a messaging thing, which you just said. So you can be drunk at home if you stay home. This does actually say if you're drunk in the bar, demonstrably drunk in the bar, and all of those other things, causing a disturbance, likely to cause a disturbance. If someone is at a bar doing those things, they actually could be cited under this, just to be clear.
Likely.
Again,
Or likely. It
again-
does not say causing all those things. It says or likely.
Yep.
And that one word changes the whole thing. And you did not remove that word, and that's why
No.
we're against it in the third ward.
And the or likely is still there, and that is, again, very explicitly there related to that prevention opportunity. So rather than waiting till someone's jumped off the bridge, that the or likely is language around prevention.
Here's a specific one, okay?
Yep.
I had too much to drink, and I go like this, but I never throw it. People do that all the time, okay? So that movement right there is or likely in somebody else's opinion, and then that person is now arrested.
Are they arrested?
Well, they're given a ticket, whatever.
Are they?
I don't know.
Again, I think this is the reasonableness test that we all want to think about as we talk about this. So I mean, my pushback to all of you is we can micro look at any ordinance in the books, and you could say, is that really going to happen to me? I mean, honestly, if you look at ordinances, you can have that same, what would really happen with this if we micro look at it? I think there is judgment in lots of our ordinances. It's just the truth. It's the way it is. So either we trust that someone doing this with a Diet Pepsi bottle is going to be arrested and cited, or we trust that they aren't. I mean, it seems like we don't have law enforcement in place to do those kinds of things in this community, and we don't have any evidence that they do. But I think that's a trust issue in this group to say, are we looking at this, if we frame it with that top definition statement, are we supportive of something moving forward? And do we have, again, trust of our law enforcement? That is, again, that's something that you guys have to think through. That in the event that someone takes a Diet Pepsi bottle and pretends they're going to throw it at Katie, when it is very joking, and yes, the person is drunk, do we really think law enforcement is going to be called?
I'm just gonna channel my inner Steve, because
Mhm.
he's not here, but, I remember what he was saying about in court, you have to prove and you have to explain why you cited somebody.
Yeah.
And so that would be where if the, I don't know, judge or whoever, decides this was unreasonable, if the officer was not reasonable,
Yeah.
then the charge would be dismissed. Is that?
Absolutely. I mean, that,
I mean, if you're likely to, how would you prosecute, so if you were cited, or whatever, for more likely doing something, you didn't do it, but how do you prove anything that, when it's in court, that you were likely gonna do that?
it's very difficult. So,
That's where like the gesturing and like starting to get in somebody's face and, you can kind of tell when somebody's about to be in a fist fight. But and it is subjective, but if you go the other route and say you're already causing a disturbance, then you have to wait until the first punch is thrown.
right, and I think, again, the goal of this, if you remember back to our original conversations, was to give another tool in the toolbox so we didn't have to give, not we, but the community had another tool in the toolbox to not go down the road of the actual language that if you're cited with what is it called, Chad? Disorderly conduct, it's a significantly more onerous charge for most people on their record than what this would be that they could get removed with education. So it really, again, we can wait till the punches are thrown and that there's a big problem and someone is past the point of the likely. The goal of this was to really have a tool in the toolbox that could look at prevention. And if you remember our initial conversations, no language is going to be perfect, but that's why the likely language is in there.
I think we just need to almost come back to the biggest thing is, well, obviously why we're here, but we're wanting to save lives, because the excessive problem is the problem, and so people are getting hurt. I was just at a court thing for my schooling. A guy literally punched a woman right in the face because he was drunk and everything like that. She had her full face and eye socket were broken 2 spots, and her whole face was just messed up just from drinking. And I think we need to come back to what we're really trying to stop is we're trying to stop deaths, we're trying to stop harm, and what are the factors that are coming from excessive drinking. And so either because there's so many factors, the common sense of if I throw something or if I don't throw something, we just have to put something out there that really helps people so they don't lose their lives, because I think that's where it really comes down to, so people aren't getting hurt.
So again, taking it right back to that perspective, the goal of this was to have another strategy for prevention. It isn't perfect.
Right.
I think that everybody acknowledges that, but it is one more strategy that we wouldn't have had previously.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I think with Jen's comment before, I'm trying to paraphrase, but I think Jen was saying that we need to keep the bloodshot or glassy eyes language in there. I'm not sure if this is what you understood too, Lisa, because that addresses alcohol and controlled and or use of controlled substances. So I think she was saying we need to keep that
More
language
specific,
in,
to-
even though we're reading it with a lens of alcohol right now.
Mhm.
Is that what you got from that?
I heard that it was in the wrong place, but I think we don't have a descriptive piece for controlled substances, which is
One says alcohol or use of controlled substance, so it's trying to describe both there.
yeah. Thank you. Descriptive substance use. But again, we might want to be more explicit about which is which. Okay, thank you. That takes us down a different road than the likely. I want to be respectful of people's thoughts about this because but I'm hearing only from some people. Yeah, Al.
I'll speak on it in the means, trying not to just repeat what other people have said, but I think likely is somewhat important, because everything that we do in prevention and in risk reduction is based on what is likely to happen if we don't take a proactive approach to dealing with what we're seeing. Anything else that we would do would only be reactive. safer, healthier, and fun community. The only way we can prevent bad things from happening is through prevention and proactive initiatives. And having a word in there like likely gives us that tool to recognize. I think
That.
the wording that's in here is about recognizing that something bad can happen based on the current circumstance. If we can recognize it, if we can stop something bad from happening, why would we not want to do that? This isn't about giving us a tool to take a reactive approach to punishing people. This is about giving us a tool to take a proactive approach to helping people. I support pretty much everything.
So again, this is different perspectives, and I'm hearing that. Yeah, Jed.
So let's use the word likely and say, likely there's gonna be citations issued. That shouldn't, right? Likely there's gonna be situations and citations issued that does save somebody's life. So,
That isn't always a bad thing.
well, but likely, you gotta walk away from this group, with this group, trusting that it's gonna err on the side of the one likely more than the other, right?
That's a great way to put it.
If we can't trust the guys that put a bulletproof vest on every day to come check for the strangers, who are we gonna trust?
And this gives them that tool to deal with it in a less aggressive.
But we also have to understand that likely there's gonna be times that the city attorney's office is gonna dismiss some of these, because the drunk college kid that left Sheehan's Pio or El Patio doesn't deserve a ticket. And that's where we have to trust that branch of government. I think we're kind of triple dipping on some of these public urination, things that they're gonna do. I mean, it's, you can have 10 words in there or 300 words. It's the call of the officer, right? Right. I mean, no matter what it says, it's the call of the officer. You were likely speeding. No, I wasn't. Or yes, I was. I mean, I don't think we need to give an abusive tool, which this isn't, to anybody. I just think we need as a group to understand that nothing's perfect.
Right.
And if we can save some lives, and if we can stop somebody from throwing up in Menominee, or excuse me, at Country Jam or the Water Street, it does make sense. But let's try to make it as uninvasive as possible. That's kind of my 2 cents.
Yeah. So a question back to you then, Jed, and I appreciate I mean, it's good that trust is a big part of this, right? And the likely word could be used on the likely to cite word as well, side as well.
In error.
What, yeah, so what would be, is the language as it reads now, with the attempt to try and clarify things a little bit, with the attempt to make it not so many words, simpler, are we there yet? Or is there additional recommendations in this section that you would move forward?
I've discussed and all that, talking to people downtown and teammates and officers and fire, the more words you put on, the tougher the messaging is gonna be.
Okay, so simpler, yep, yeah.
I'm a simpleton. I mean, if it says, don't be an idiot, I'm fine with that, but you can't do that for citation purposes and stuff. I truly do trust that the ECPD is not walking into the Pioneer going, Joe, come here, I just saw you do a shot. Because you're gonna smell like alcohol, you're gonna, student organizations I've dealt with and talked to, we just wanna make sure that that group of people isn't sought after
Yeah.
in the likeliness of abuse of power. We don't think it's gonna happen, but that's where the verbiage comes in.
Yeah.
You don't wanna be sitting at Mona Lisa's and ECPD walks in and goes, you look glossy-eyed. Well, what is that?
And that's what we said, you move that stuff back, and that's the other factors that build on top of that, the worst stuff,
But the
and
more
then you add
ingredients
that.
you give somebody, the more things they can glob onto. And
So to get mad about. Yeah, okay, so simpler, okay.
Then after that,
So I just want,
Let's not let the 0.1% of the population ruin it for everybody else. I mean, it's something that we gotta be careful of.
yeah.
So.
So thank you for that. I would acknowledge that one of the things this group, we did get some feedback that having clearer language about what intoxication means would be helpful. So that's why some of the additional words are in there. So it's hard. I mean, when then you look at it, it's like, yeah, if it's a lot of language, just don't be stupid would be nice. I also heard Jed say that, you know, the focus of this is the worst of the worst in preventing that. It's not everything else that happens in Eau Claire that maybe some of us don't think is great, but you know, it's not about that. This is really having a tool, Al mentioned, to not have to react, but to be able to do some prevention. I get that there may still not be entire agreement. Other thoughts about this? Because I think Section D is the hardest. We've spent the most time on it, and we've gone back and forth. I'm sorry?
Entire agreement?
What's that?
There may not.
There may
Yeah, I
not
know.
be entire agreement, I said. Yeah. I'm acknowledging that.
Standardized field sobriety, if I can ask your expertise. I know if you refuse on a DUI stop, you're guilty, correct? I mean, you get the citation?
If you refuse the field sobriety test?
Yes.
I mean, we still have to have probable cause to
Okay.
make an arrest, but I mean, that's, somebody that refuses to do the field sobriety test can be an indicator for us as, to continue on. Now, we gotta be careful that we're not looking at the same criteria for field sobriety tests that we are for excessive drinking, because you gotta remember .08 is the legal limit for, there's something different about driving a vehicle and what the requirements are with the field sobriety test. I think that if somebody says, hey, I haven't been drinking anything, and we can't make you take a PBT to see how intoxicated you are, so there'll be other indicators, but glossy eyes, bloodshot eyes, stumbling are some indicators to us that they may be intoxicated. So I would say that those may not only be the things, but they would be added on as part of our report that said not only this, this, and this, but they also had this, this, and this to get to that point.
There are many people at the limit to not be able to drive that, you know, could be in this room right now, right? And you wouldn't notice anything, but really they shouldn't be driving. So this is a whole step past that, I think, is part of Chad's
The other thing
point.
that, you know, as I'm sitting here listening, is that we're trying to address behavior that results from that. If you want to go out and get intoxicated, you're going to walk home and you're not causing any disturbance or anything. It doesn't matter what blood alcohol content you are, except if you're at a point where you need to be detoxed, you're not doing anything wrong. There's nothing in this word here that, in this verbiage, that you would be cited for. It's when there's a behavior that we've described in here goes along with that, that this starts to take place. Does that make sense?
It's not accurate. Or is likely to cause is a judgment on an officer who sees a guy staggering down the street, okay?
Okay.
Or how does he know? You gonna watch him for a while? Feel like maybe he's gonna urinate somewhere? Is that his, you know? It's a vague thing, and that's what, you know, we brought this up at the neighborhood association meeting for the second time now. There is no support for this as it sits here. I'm not representing myself, I'm representing my neighborhood
Sure,
association.
yeah.
So I'm just telling you, you know, and we've had an election since this didn't go through the first time. I think it's got less of a chance going through this city council than it did the last one. And certainly in my neighborhood, my city councilman is, you know, a friend of the students, as he should be, because the students are part of the neighborhood.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, again, the messaging of anything that moves forward is going to be critically important. We'll talk about that in a minute. Helena, I think you had a comment, and then Katie.
I guess my own observation, Kevin, is that the neighborhood might be overestimating how many police are actually just driving around. I think they have bigger fish to fry on many nights than watching someone who's staggering and not causing. I don't see any police vehicles, and I live close to Water Street, just cruising as if they have a lot of officers. Am I right or wrong in that? I think you're limited in your resources due to more severe calls. I mean, I've made calls because of somebody being at my door intoxicated that I couldn't get rid of. And the only way I got a response was if I added, I'm elderly and I'm alone, please hurry. And you were only 3 blocks away, you were on Water Street. But I just don't see that I don't see where you are coming from. I think maybe the messaging will be key.
Yeah. And again, it's a trust issue. A part of this is a trust
it's a
issue
reality.
and a reality and knowing the resources. Katie?
So just in response, Kevin, to your somebody staggering down the sidewalk, that's not a problem. Somebody staggering in the street, that moves it up to the level of they're likely to cause an accident, they're likely to be hit, they're harming themselves or others. So I see that as, again, I used the example a couple weeks ago of, somebody behind the wheel, intoxicated, sitting there with their car keys in the ignition, is very different than somebody sitting on a bar stool and saying, well, you're gonna drive home. You don't know they're gonna drive home if they're on a bar stool. You can say it's a lot likelier they're gonna drive home if they're sitting behind the wheel of a car. So again, I think reasonable needs to be reasonable. So if they're staggering down the street, that only meets one criterion. It doesn't meet the second criterion yet.
Mhm.
But if they're staggering in the road and they don't seem to know where they're going, then that, I would say, is they're likely to.
Got two cross harm.
Right.
That's the game.
So I'm hearing from some people concern and from some people that this does give a prevention tool. Is that a fair summary of this? We could spend, I think we've talked about this a lot, but is that a fair description? Is that correct?
Is that what we're gonna tell the council?
We will put forward language and we will talk about the process of this group, and we absolutely will say, we're not going to vote as a team that this is exactly what we want. And part of the messaging will be, how do you guys bring it back to your different constituent groups? So absolutely what will be talked with council, that is that we talk through this. There was support for some language, there were mixed feelings about other language, and that will be clear. Absolutely, Brandon. Do you have additional comments about D?
No, I just think, if we do bring this forward to the council and say, there's support for this, I think it's important to say, part D was something that, we talked through a lot, and
Yeah.
not everyone was in support of it, and room was divided or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I'm seeing mostly support of this language. Actually, I would say more than the majority of people in this room I've heard supportive about this language, frankly. So.
I still have concern for it because I do trust the people in this room, but in 20 years, I don't know who's going to be in this room. I think when we talk about public ordinances, we need to look at the larger scope, and I don't know what's going to happen 20 years
Sure.
down the road.
Well, that's going to be your job, probably not my job, but ordinances change all the time, absolutely.
He's absolutely right.
Yep.
I'm sure that's one
Yep.
of the things with Kevin's neighborhood group is the same thing. They're looking at everybody, and what's gonna happen in the
Long term.
future.
Sure.
That's how this started.
Yep.
How many years ago, and now we're dealing with it.
Sure. And I think I've heard from you, Dave, also. Oh, I'm sorry, Jed.
As a group, with the first meeting, Bramwell Park, the third ward, to everybody, we've all said the last 20 years, it has gotten better than it was from tire fires, from back in my day, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So we're moving in the right direction. I think we've also all said that this could be a good tool in our toolbox to help. Dave, I've heard you say that with some explanation of this, the "and" language in particular at the previous meeting, that it's like, oh, this makes some sense now. I don't think this is as bad as was hyped up from the get-go. Am I reflecting correctly what I heard you say last time, that there's...
I don't quite remember what it was. You'd have to be more
Yeah.
specific.
No, but around this piece of the ordinance, that there's language here that, again, for the most
there is
extreme of
some,
this extreme, there's some usefulness.
There is some, yes.
Okay, all right. Any final feedback about this? Because I do want to have a chance to go through section 2. Any additional thoughts or feedback? Okay, so I've captured some of the thoughts, and there'll be some feedback before anything moves forward to council, obviously, with these additional thoughts. What about section 2? Some pretty significant changes to this section based on the feedback that the group provided. So just, again, the group, this group, there was lots of feedback that it was targeted to specifically at certain neighborhoods. So that has changed. There was a lot of feedback about the clarification that a ticket can't be issued if the owner or occupant requests or consents to have the drop-off. There's Clarification of language around the safe ride home to again say that this has nothing to do with the ability for pickup to take people home. There's an addition based on some of the conversation we had about prohibiting alcohol consumption in the vehicle for hire. So this was feedback from this meeting that lots of the consumption actually happened on the bus as people were traveling around. And it removed the requirement about the legal parking spot. So lots of changes in this section based on feedback from the group. So thoughts or feedback around section 2. Quite a bit simplified with the goal to message more clearly that this was about big, massive drunken drop-offs in all parts of the community.
I thought I read somewhere this morning that now there's something where there's no limitations on where the bus can drop off.
So the section, there was an additional section about the, being in certain places that didn't allow parking, and that got removed. So
it was taken out.
It was taken out. So if you look, I can walk through. So in A, the section about, doesn't restrict picking up of passengers for safe ride homes. It clarifies unless an owner or occupant specifically requests the drop-off. So if you're having a party and you're bringing in 15 people and those people are invited guests and if they happen to come in a hired vehicle, that's perfectly acceptable. It adds section B about the consumption of alcohol in the in that motor bus or vehicle for hire, unless it's explicitly a charter. And it doesn't apply to city transit bus. That's not new, is it, Janessa? No, that was already in there. So this is significantly shorter as well.
So
With
you can drink on a city bus?
You can't already drink on a city bus, but this is just saying that the pieces of this have nothing to do with city bus. You already can't drink on city buses. Separate language.
So when it says this section does not restrict the picking up of passengers for safe ride homes, that means somebody, group of 20 gets picked up somewhere, they can be dropped off at their apartment.
Absolutely. So this is really only dropping off at a place for celebration, if that makes any sense. Although they can be, more than that many people can be dropped off on Water Street anytime.
Or more can be dropped off if the
Occupant or the, yep, absolutely, the owner or tenant approves it.
How would I approve it again? Would I call the bus company or do I need to be on the bus?
I'm not one to answer that question, but then we'd have to work that out procedurally. Typically, those kind of procedural things don't happen in ordinance, but yeah, there would be a process for that. Just like procedurally, it's not an ordinance how you could get, we talked a lot about for the whole front section, how if you get cited for this, how you could go through a class and not have the citation hold. That's a whole, those things are not an ordinance typically, that level of detail.
The tenant would just talk to the bus driver and say it's okay.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, there would be something simple. Yeah,
So I guess the Third Ward Neighborhood Association is against this part of this ordinance as well. We are pro-student. We thought the bus was great for the students, and anything that infringes on that isn't, in our opinion. I'm unaware of any problems with the bus in the Third Ward, even though it was cited as it was an area. And this, whether you want to admit it or not, has caused the bus to quit operating.
so this hasn't, because there's nothing in current existence that would prohibit the bus from operating, just to be clear.
What's the threat of it then?
Again, I don't know why the bus decided to stop operating. I mean, he's not here today, so I don't want to speak for him, and I have no idea. This is not related to a specific bus. It is related to concerns that have been expressed by a number of people in the community, including Third Ward folks. So, yeah, Helene.
And I would guess if you haven't had problems, you won't have problems.
Yeah.
But for the rest of the city, the other neighborhoods having problems, work for us.
Mhm.
So I guess I don't see why you would not want an ordinance that would work for another neighborhood. If you don't have problems, you probably won't. But my question was on the legally parked section you took out.
Mhm.
Since you changed the words and you took the specific neighborhoods out, it applies to other neighborhoods that don't have parking issues. So I would think that you would just keep that in there because you shouldn't be able to park illegally when you're picking up or dropping off.
I can't speak to that. Janessa, can you speak to that change? I'm sorry, I don't know enough, I don't know anything about it. I'm not gonna, so the legally parked is a question.
Yep, so we got feedback that just that section alone, saying that a vehicle for hire should only stop where it's illegally parked would be enough to shut down the bus, which is not the goal of the ordinance. So we took that section out and felt that, the issues of buses or vehicles stopping in the middle of the street is already addressed by a different city ordinance that the police can enforce separately.
So
It would still be enforced, even
It-
though it's not in this ordinance.
it could,
Okay.
yeah. So thank you for that clarification.
Well,
Yeah.
feedback, which I don't know if taking it out and then we're gonna reinforce when something like it went away when it didn't really go away. If that's right, my question is why can't the bus or buses stop at the bus stops? Just like the city bus does. We're gonna get away from all the parking, everything else, the bus stops where the bus stops are. We're not gonna have, then he doesn't need to be illegally parked, then he doesn't need to be.
There's no language now about any of that, so go ahead,
We had
Janessa.
offered that kind of originally before we presented to council the first time, but he said those stops weren't sufficient for him because he wants to be in the neighborhoods, providing that service directly to residential areas.
So, yeah. So that was already proposed, and again, it's not problematic. So again, and that's part of this messaging piece is to try and say, this is very simple now. It's really the only thing that it's speaking to is a large group of uninvited people being dropped off.
Uninvited large groups sells better than large groups of uninvited people, because for the Randall Park or Third Ward, if I come up to the bus and say, come on off, all 50 of you, there's no violation.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, Tom.
There isn't.
But I don't know why it shut down, because I hate to say this to the neighborhood associations, nothing has changed.
Mhm.
If Joe comes out and says, come to my house, there's no
Right.
infraction.
I think it was the guy last time that spoke to the fact that there's been a number of complaints at the university, or people who get large groups of kids dropped off because they think there's a house party.
Yeah.
And then their house gets tagged as a
Right.
problem.
As a problem. So that is part of what this is trying to prevent, is actually the individual who isn't going out to the bus saying drop all 50 off, but is saying don't drop them off. So, and I think you're exactly right, Beth.
Well, and the bigger picture is if they were drinking on the bus, just waiting to find the house. It's not a rolling party. It shouldn't be a rolling party.
It shouldn't be a rolling party, so this is the addition. So and that was feedback from this group. Brandon, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry.
Well, if this ordinance isn't what shut down that particular service, but it's shut down now, I don't understand why we are including this in this ordinance anyway. I think it feels like government overreach, saying, we don't want this. It's not really the city's place to step in and say we don't want it, especially why is it included in this if now it's not even a problem anymore? Because who knows, in 10 years, a better service could come along that drops 15 students off or whatever.
I think it's really speaking, again, to that prevention, no matter who might be the service. If we've got ginormous whatever that Uber, I don't know if that would pertain, that comes and drops uninvited people off, that this is, again, a prevention. There was never an intention to target any individual company. I think, again, the goal with any ordinance is to do something that is the right thing for our community. So
I think the original ordinance did target that blue bus company. I think that's pretty obvious. It was specifically in those two neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, we don't know why he stopped. But
Right.
I just think, in 10 years, a better company could come along that does a service, because the blue bus service I rode my freshman year was safe, was pretty clean, and
Yep.
doesn't have the issues it does now. So I don't know why we'd be prohibiting a next company, a better company, to come along and do the service better, which this could be doing. Could be prohibiting a better company to come along.
So I think that's the question for the group. Typically, ordinances we want to frame for what, in the simplest way possible, gives a frame for best practice moving forward. That's how I would describe this. It's a very simple frame for best practice. And I think the question for the group is, do we think this is not best practice for any group that would come in to give large groups of people rides to various neighborhoods? Again, under the general frame of this discussion of public good order. So I think that, Brandon, my pushback to you to think about is this a general enough frame and simple enough frame that no matter who came in to provide this service, how would it actually restrict them?
If it's not an issue anymore, I don't know why it's included in this.
I think the community has had experience that it's been a long-term issue.
But then I always heard that 20 years ago it was worse, and then this blue bus made it better, and then worse again.
So the opportunity to put a simple frame was the thought that the next company that comes, or the company that comes back, there's a simple frame. So it's not just whatever you think is best, but we'll have a little bit of a frame for what's next and best. Yeah, a simple regulation. So, yeah, Beth.
Essentially, you can't drop kids off where they're not wanted.
Correct.
So I think from that perspective, a new company could come in and operate, but you just can't bring them where people aren't wanted. Like, you can't drop them off at a harvest party that's not a house party.
Yep,
Yeah, and
that is a
unwanted-
very simple, unwanted people at a place is really the focus.
Over 9 unwanted people. You can still drop off 9 unwanted people.
And that's like I've continued to ask that, but it's, this ordinance won't address that procedure further on, because once again, I don't know how I'm gonna tell people, come over to my
Sure.
house.
So we'll do some conversations about that separately, but again, in ordinance, it doesn't typically explicitly say that. Thanks for that nonverbal, Al. Go ahead.
The neighborhood association, like we talked about, every bus stop. Do you want groups of 30 people walking 5 blocks or 3 blocks? There's groups of 50 people walking 3 or 5 blocks. Or would you rather have them walk 10 yards from bus stop? I mean, that's something you guys have to think about, because now you've got mobs of people going A to B, B to C.
Potentially.
As opposed to just bus house to house.
Right out front.
Again, this is partly responding to those big groups of uninvited. I mean, that's, as Beth identified, it was real. The language is very simple in saying that. Chad, were you going to add something? No? You look like no?
No.
More comments about this? And I'm checking time. Okay, yeah, Katie.
Oh, I'm just giving it a thumbs up.
Thumbs up, okay.
Lisa,
It's tough. This is tough. I get it.
really the big reason this came up is addressing a lot of the concerns that we had heard and trying to figure out how to resolve some of the issues that we're having. It was not just from the neighborhood groups, but it was also from students and people that live there that were addressing the issue. And the question is, how do you stop large amounts of people, or what can be done to try to maybe restrict large amounts of people being dropped off in one location, where they're being dropped off right in front of somebody's house that doesn't want them there, and they're coming into the house.
Yep.
It'd be one thing if they're dropped off in front of the house, and they went on the sidewalk, and because they weren't invited, they went somewhere else. But no, they were pushing their way into houses. So what can we do proactively and look at this to maybe prevent some of that from happening, or discourage some of that from happening, and still allow people to get safe rides wherever they're going? But they should have a purpose of where they're going, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's what we were trying to address. Now, you bring out that, everybody calls it blue bus, brings it out. Well, that was the only bus company that was doing this now, and that's what we were trying to address, was the issues that were coming out of that. So that was the only company we could talk about. If there were 3 other companies that were doing the same thing, we could talk about 3 companies, but there was only one. So I personally do not single out the blue bus at all. It's reacting to the issues that were brought to us from people in the community.
So again, on principle, this is about uninvited large groups. Thank you for that language, Jed. And about drinking on that large vehicle. Yes.
I'll just comment quickly that, as with the other section, I support this as it is. I don't see the downside. It seems to protect everybody, including the homeowners, the property owners.
I think you guys really helped with language, so I want to just say that to everybody. When you look at the language of the whole, all of this that we've talked through, it's simpler, it captures content that all of you have provided and the feedback that, again, not that everybody agrees with 100% of what is there, but I'm hearing at least what I've seen is reflected a lot of the conversations around these tables, so. You're mulling, yeah, Helene.
I just have an observation.
Mm.
I'm not asking for a change, but
Mhm.
your hours of 9 to 3, if we're concerned about safe rides home,
Mm.
are we going home at 9 p.m. usually? Or is that just, the issue I think that happened with the bus that I heard from our officer is that the students were being taxied from party to party.
Right.
And what was once a good idea, safe ride, was abused
Mhm.
because there was drinking on the bus and it just went, I don't know, from bad to worse. It was, so I'm not exactly sure, I guess from the neighborhood's point of view, the safe rides home, yes, we support that.
Mm-hmm.
Take them home, pick up whoever you want, take
Yeah.
them wherever they want to go. You generally don't have 20 people living in a neighborhood house, maybe an apartment or something.
Sure.
But it's just an observation.
The 9 p.m. to 3 a.m.
Hours
Okay.
necessarily do we need to have buses.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah.
There's a lot of activities, especially with weather like now and this time of year where there's events that go on during the day, and I'm sure that's why that time has been picked, that, they start drinking at noon or 3 o'clock or 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock, that's why it needs to be there.
Okay.
But just to bounce back, it can be from noon to midnight. It's legal for him to do what he's doing as long as they're not uninvited.
Right.
So
And maybe the point is that the time is not
There
so
you go.
important.
Sip on a safe ride.
everything's legal as long as they're invited. And that's what I would like to see is this get passed through, and then an association or somebody comes up and goes, well, hold on, they can still have the blue bus? The blue bus, whatever company, like you said, Jed, if it's jedmobile.com, we can all be doing it, it's legal. So noise at 3 o'clock in the morning, and just make sure we all are aware of the fact that at 4 o'clock in the morning, a blue bus can sit on Broadway or Niagara Street and pick up 20 kids legally and take them to wherever they want to go, as long as they're invited, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
As long as they're invited or they're going
home.
home. Hopefully they're
Wherever
invited to
go
be home.
Yeah, yeah. What's that?
Maybe they're going fishing.
Maybe they're going fishing. Final thoughts. This is hard, right? I really appreciate the willingness to dig hard into this, and I get that there's lots of perspectives and there's lots of ways to look at it. What I want you to do is take the next 10 minutes to just, maybe even not that long, but I've got a messaging little handout. And one of the things that you guys brought forward is if this goes forward, there's some important things to think about. We need to think about who do we talk with this about? How is it, who are the audiences? What are the key points about this ordinance that are critical? What's the timing of the ordinance and what issues do we have with timing? What format should communication be? So that's the format is around what kind of ways to communicate and who should be spokespeople. So what I want you to do is just on your own, just take a couple of minutes to jot down some ideas. Who do you think needs to know about public good order ordinance and the work that this group has been doing? What kind of key messages? And I've heard a number. I wish I could have tape recorded. Actually, we have it tape recorded. Thank you. A couple of you, it's like, oh, that was said in a really clear way. But what key points, what kind of key messages? When do you think this canon should go forward? And then who might be people that could speak to it? Okay? So if you could jot some ideas down, we're just going to pause for a little quiet time, not nap time. I added a couple of clarifying words if that helps you guys as you look at this. Guys have some thoughts jotted down? More time? A little bit more? Another minute or so? What's that? Yeah.
Just reading in fresh eyes from an outside perspective.
Yeah.
If you read this, what happens at 8 p.m.?
Yeah.
Because to me,
Anything goes.
right, you can
Mhm.
drop off 15 people
Yeah.
unwanted.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and I don't know, I think.
I don't think that was the intent.
Yeah, no, but that is how it reads, I would say. We can talk to Janessa about that. So thank you for that, Beth. Or after 3 as well. Good. I like the notes. We'll wait for the couple people to return, but. All right, so one of the things that was a really clear, at least I heard from much of the group was, boy, I didn't know that until I sat down in this room and it was, we spent some more time digging in the language. I didn't understand that that was the purpose of this. I didn't get what this was all about until I really spent time, 5 meetings worth of time understanding it, right? So messaging about this, if anything moves forward, is important. I'm just going to let you guys finish up. So you guys are talking about the bus? Okay, so there was a question that was raised about the 9 to 3. Do you want to quickly say, Janessa, to the group rather than?
Yeah, there was just, concern that, well, when is it ever okay to drop off 15 uninvited guests in front of somebody's house? And, we kind of heard that feedback up front, and that's why the time limit is in there, that the 9 to 3 is when the problems were happening with house parties and the drop-offs. So that's why the time limit's in there. But otherwise, outside of those regulations, you can drop off
unwanted guests.
So if we took the time away, you could never drop off uninvited guests.
That would be,
or at least not more than 10.
Well,
right.
so, should we?
So I think Colleen had brought up the time issue, and Beth's asking now is the time. So,
Realized that was
yeah.
really
So if the focus really is uninvited guests and drinking, should we remove the time entirely? It was that time was prompted only because of the concerns that were expressed by various neighborhood associations that was the most problematic time. So one possibility would be just to remove the time language. Okay. So I'm going to come back to messaging. Thank you for thinking about that. No, it's good. Nope. So the consensus of the group was that something could continue to move forward even if not everybody agreed on all pieces, and that there might be a variety of feedback from this group. So I'm acknowledging that as well. But that generally the consensus of the group said that this makes sense in our bigger picture look at really unhealthy substance and alcohol use. That I think Jed used the worst of the 10%, 1%, whatever it might be, that's what this focused on, and this is one of the tools in the toolbox. So there's general consensus that this was one of the strategies that would move forward, imperfect as it is. But in order to do that, we had to do something different about messaging, because how it was messaged, at least initially, was not clear to people. There were concerns expressed. I think a number of you have talked about that. So who needs to know about this and in which different ways? Yes, Brandon.
Well, I don't think the messaging wasn't clear. It was the process.
Process. Sorry, thank you. That's better language. The process wasn't as clear. The process wasn't what the concern was about process. I think you're right. I think that's important. So process versus, thank you for correcting me, process versus message. I think the group has said, though, that we've worked on process here and that the message now might be important. Is that a fair way to say it? Thank you for calling me on that. So who needs to know more about this? You guys all have represented, you've worn some kind of a hat in this group. Talk to me a little bit about who needs to know more about what we've talked about. Yeah.
Obviously, students.
Students, okay, so students is an important group. Brandon, were you going to say the same thing? Yep, students.
General public.
General public, and I think that's been a really reinforced message from a number of you. Dave, you've been one of them. So, yep, that you're hearing from lots of people that this is concerning language when people didn't understand some of it.
Business owners, especially ones that serve alcohol.
Okay, so business owners, alcohol serving. Al, that has nothing to do with you. Alcohol serving. So general public is everybody. That's obviously captures it. Are there any more specific groups that need are we concerned about reaction from more specific groups? Yeah, Kitty.
Neighborhood associations.
Neighborhood associations, thank you. Yep.
Landlords?
Landlords. Okay, so, and is that mostly, well, I guess there are a couple sections in there that have a very, okay, thank you. We did try to get a landlord to this table, just so you guys know, and that we weren't successful, but there's been communication. They're receiving the information, so. Okay, I'm sorry? No?
Some floaties just went by.
Some floating. Speaking of. So what clear messages? I've heard a couple of you have awesome, like when we talk in health about message maps, it's like capturing a thought that just was like, oh. So give me some of your messages, your simple messages. The and. All right, well, and. All right, thank you.
I think we just need to share what this is really about. Going back to it, this is about a proactive and preventative approach to increasing the health and safety and fun within our community.
Okay. I saw someone else's hand. No? Yeah.
It's one tool.
One tool. Yeah, we talked a lot about that. Thank you for remembering that. Yeah.
I think if you're invited, you're good to go. Like you're invited to
Oh.
and safe rides home are all okay.
She'll get home safe.
Sorry, I don't know if we should use that, because as of right now, you can't get home safe. You could if there was a new company, but as of now, there's no company. And if I go back and talk to my constituents, no, don't worry, you guys can get home safe, they're gonna say, well, what?
Yeah, and I think one of our strategies has focused on how do we pay attention to that as a community effort, so it's important. So I think there's a question here. Okay? Yeah, Helene.
Can I just ask, how have they gotten home safely the last 6 to 8 weeks?
You know, it's easy to do that in April, in May, you know, walking back, but I have a friend, Christina, who is walking and, you know, the sidewalks in the Randall Park neighborhood aren't that great. Slipped, fell, ankle snapped, she had to go through surgery, had to sit out a couple weeks of school. So it's stuff like that. In the April, May, that's not that much of an issue. Once you get to January and February, that's when people are starting, December, starting to say, okay, well, where was this bus, how do I get home safe? And in September, that'll be the first question I get when the students come back is, what happened to the blue bus? And then I can say, don't worry, you'll get home safe. And I'll say, well,
Right, so I think this, again, not related to the ordinance, but related to community strategy, Safe Ride Home is going to be important. Yes?
I thought you told me that they were Ubering it. And
Yeah.
they realized that the Uber was cheaper, actually. And
Yes.
they pooled their money.
So again, we're going to talk about that, like what can we come up with a strategy not related to the ordinance issue though? Katie?
I think focusing on reasonably likely and that it has to hold up in court.
Okay, thank you. Other messages that you think are really important? I'm going to put Jed's 1%. Yeah?
I would say trust.
Ah.
I don't even know trust, but mutual respect, especially for law enforcement.
Yeah. Well, and I think both directions, right? I think both the individual that is not the law enforcement officer and law enforcement officer, that we really want to keep pushing trust and respect on both sides. I don't like side language, but that exists. Okay? Yeah, Helene.
I would say maybe just focus on the fact that it's for the common good. So if one neighborhood doesn't really see it as being, why are we doing this? There is a larger community that's somewhere else might need it.
Okay, so So I think speaking to the third ward versus other neighborhoods question.
I think a big thing that we talked about was community. So
Yeah. Community versus neighborhood. Okay. Sorry.
And I think just to clarify, I think Doug was saying the 1/10 of 1%, right?
Yeah.
It's 1/10 of 1.
Any other messages? Okay, I'm going to go on to when. Talk me through thoughts about the when. Does this group have any thoughts or recommendations collectively or individually about when this might go? And I would say we talked a little bit at the last meeting, but talk me through.
The base I've dealt with, they would appreciate their voice being heard when they get back. So either when or after school starts in 18, 19.
Okay, so after school.
Somebody voted 2021, but I thought that'd be a little too long.
Okay. Anybody have any different thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I think it's gonna be important that that this is explained and supported before, during, and after implementation, really.
Yeah.
So messaging before, during, and after is going to be important. And I think, Brandon, you talked a little bit about, the how of some of this. I think devil in the detail is too harsh of a language, but, not everything is an ordinance. So we don't have an ordinance, the whole plan for someone being able to get a diversion, is that the right language? That's not an ordinance, but that's going to be important as part of the messaging, so, okay? So I think from a process perspective, just having spent 5 meetings with all of you, I would like the recommendation from this group going forward to respect the process and the voice of particularly the student group that came out at the March meeting and was very concerned, and to not move this forward earlier than when the students get back. I think just what I've heard from all of you guys, I will want to report to City Council in the processing of and facilitating these discussions that really thoughtful discussion, not entire agreement, but that really voices are important. And I'm certain, as Kevin said, we have a number of new City Council members, but they're going to want to know that the people that feel impacted by this, even though it's a community ordinance, are able to express their thoughts. So we do have to message in a way that they can understand it in a positive. I think all of us have heard a lot of new and good information. So part of the timing is also the how. How does this need to be shared in a way that is productive and not destructive? Zach, were you going to say something?
Yeah, so it's kind of, I feel like has to go with the timing and the how. So
yeah.
If we did have it go through in the middle of the summer, and how we should share it, I think is really huge, because how I got the information about this whole ordinance was over social media. And so if somehow either we're pushing it through social media, through law enforcement, I should say online or videoing. So if we have someone, because I think it's a really misconception of you have this picture on social media, right? And people read it. I think if you have something that's super easy, that you sit down, someone that's educated, make it super easy, for it's like one of those law enforcement roll call videos. You show everything, what is happening, what this ordinance includes. So have a video that explains to the students, that someone's actually talking, not just on paper, that explains to them what are the circumstances that will actually, what will happen from this ordinance if you get caught anything in here, or anything that. So video, bus drives up, people get out, you'll get a sign, just make it, dumb it down for everyone so they can understand what's going on.
Okay, so all speaking to format, getting the message out as clearly and simply as possible. Again, to decrease the making it larger than life when that's not the intent. And okay, maybe we can have a little humor too. Are any of you good actors?
I think you need a Q&A forum over at the university also.
Okay, just at the university, or speaking to the larger
group, yeah, but
at least at UW-Eau Clay?
More than one Q&A, etc.
Okay. So opportunity where if people do want to have a conversation, there can be that. Thank you.
Are we moving on to format? Or
We are,
Right,
both
those kinds of
and.
things, yeah.
Yep, I think Brandon, you're next though.
Don't quote me on this, but I'm a part of the College of Business. I've had candid conversations with the dean. Most of the underages and issues come from individuals who are more social, and I know like those groups and organizations, and I think it would be important if, you know, Chad or Lieutenant Weber or someone could come, because those organizations have like 100 to 150 people in them, like these big College of Business orgs, and if they could come in and go to them, you know, go to their org for 5 to 10 minutes and talk about this, because I know those group of students are the ones that are most passionate and most concerned, and so, you know, you could alleviate some of their concerns, and like, obviously I'd be more than willing to go in as well, and try to explain the ordinance. I think that would help, instead of saying you have to come to our forum. I think a forum would be good, but also going to their orgs, and I'd be more than willing to do that also as student body president, obviously.
Thanks, Brandon. I think one of the direct asks will be around how can UW Eau Claire partner with us. Again, this is, and I think we have to be careful to say this is not just about UW Eau Claire, but I do think that we should probably put some extra effort in that communication. Is that a fair statement, given kind of where this has come from? And partnering to do that is going to be important. So thank you. So, Brandon.
So listening
Yeah.
sessions at city council, and then just articles in the newspaper. I know we don't control the paper, but that would be.
Yeah.
They have a paper.
I love the newspaper. It didn't get delivered to my house today. Both of you. Actually, volume 1 might be a lot of readers of that, so.
Beth does great speaking in public, so if you want to volunteer.
I like that. Thank you, Beth. Spokespeople, that's good. Al?
I think it's important, whoever speaks on this and whatever the intentions are for us to speak, we have to make sure that we're sharing one message.
Yeah.
Come out with different messages or anything that may be contradictory or conflicting, it can cause harm to the whole process and our end goal.
So I appreciate that, Al. I think, can we all agree on what process we've gone through? If I kind of get some bullet points about what process, who was involved, those kinds of things. I mean, that seems like something that we all can agree on. We can agree on the types of conversations around this ordinance we've had and the places where input, that it has changed based on that conversation. I think we have to be clear, all of us around this table, that not everybody is in entire agreement, but that there are some things that we've all shared in understanding some of those key messages that we all understand. Is that fair? Yeah, Brandon.
Yeah, like, I'm going to explain this ordinance to the best of my ability to as many people as possible because I care about my constituency, but I will not go up and say I agree with all of this, and like, because I shout it down, and I don't agree with all of it, but like, I'm going to go through and explain it to the best of my ability and how, you know, it's not going to be punitive to the student body and everything like that. So I don't know if I can agree that I'm going to have the same message as everyone, because I don't think I will, but I'm going to do the best of my ability to explain it as well as possible.
Sure.
Does that alleviate concerns?
Yeah, and I think we want to be as clear with our message as we can be. And it's obviously, as facilitator of this discussion, it's important to me that we all say that we've had a voice at the table and that there's been a process to look really carefully at this, so minimally that. And that there's clear support from the get-go of the meetings that there's an issue that we have to address and that this is one tool in the toolbox, imperfect as it is. So I think, again, I'm looking at the clock, it's 20 to 5. So an ask of all of you, if based on this meeting, I'm looking at Janessa, but I think Janessa will have some time to mull a little bit some of the additional feedback today based on the draft that you all got. I will summarize all of this and get this out to the group, but start drafting some some kind of framing points so that based on what you all said, some of the messages, some of the timing, so that we start what would be eventually going into probably a report to council. Does that make sense? I think there has to be something out of this group that's a report back to council about what is. And then I think we need to think through how do people in this task force want to be involved moving forward. So that's my question for you right now, is to give some feedback. We're running out of time to do some additional conversation about the other strategies, but that was really the intent, was to look at the strategies and think through what do we do with these. There's a lot of, my failure in voting was giving you guys five sticky notes, I think. I should have given you fewer, so we had fewer ones that bump forward. But so questions to the group, and I mean, this is really time for honest feedback. You were brought together with the ask of looking at the Public Good Order Ordinance and looking broadly at potential strategies. You've identified a bunch of strategies, and you've given feedback on the Public Good Order Ordinance. You could say, I'm done, Liska, we're finished. That would be one option, and you can mull that. Another option would be, we want to think a little bit more about these strategies and what as a community we can provide. I mean, this is such a diverse group of people getting together and talking, and really has brought different ideas to the table. So another strategy could be that we get back together and talk through how could some of these move forward. So Brandon brought up the whole idea, we need something in this community that gets people home safely. So who can, we could agree as a group that we want to push that forward as a strategy, and we need to identify who might work on that. Might not be us working on it, but we want to highlight to City Council that this is a critical thing that happens next, as one example of a next step. Thoughts or feedback on, like, okay, I've done my job, I'm good, or I've done my job, but I'd like to have a continued conversation about strategies, and I want to work together for a little bit longer, at least until we get to resolution around the ordinance. Helene.
Can I just back up to that word you have up there, spokespeople?
Oh yeah, sorry, I kind of jumped.
Well, that's okay, but I just wanted to get my 2 cents in. I think Al should just put all of everyone.
So I'm hearing Al and Beth and Brandon.
Everybody respects the fire department. Some people are a little afraid of the police department, but I think the police department should be involved to prove that that their attitudes are good. They are our strongest public good institutions, I think, that are visible and that we rely on and need. And every time that Al speaks, I just think that's right. I mean, he has a way of saying we're for the public good, and that's what they are. So that's all.
Calling out your table mate. There you go.
Well, no, more than just a neighborhood or a. We all have our vested interests. Their interest is definitely for the public good.
Yeah.
And so I think that overrides
So.
our worries and our fears.
That's an interesting, self-interest is interesting language. We each have our own self-interest, right? And kind of thinking through what is it that helps us speak or not speak on something.
I meant to say vested interest, but self-interest.
But it is. I mean, this isn't a bad thing. But, Brandon mentioned, he might get eaten alive if he pushes too hard saying it's, that's part of his self-interest, just like it is for each of us. Each of us has a different spot that we sit in, so. And we need to know that. All right, so feedback on next steps. We can keep thinking about people, and we'll be tapping you. Camera in your face, Beth? No?
Yeah. You clearly mixed us up.
I love it. What we were going to do, and we can still do, is take those 17 items. So again, the first one was the Public Good Order Ordinance, and we've talked about that. That's why it starts at 2, and give you 3 dots to vote to see if we could bubble up a more prioritized list. But I mean, when we can do that before you leave, I tried to go through and, anything that scored 7 and over, I just arbitrarily made green just as a cut point. But Some of them kind of go together. Some of them are sort of addressed in public good order, but not entirely. The alternatives for ordinance violation is part of the implementation of the diversion program for public good order. The policy related to safe rides is partly addressed in public good order, but then it also is, this transportation practice change is probably something that we need to focus on, even if that one is gone.
I think that to have peace
Yeah.
in the public good order, you're gonna have some transportation practice change.
So number 7 might be, you might put all your 3 dots there. Okay.
10.
I mean, 10, sorry. Thank you. So I tried to note a little bit. So some people had said, education for alcohol establishments and for owners and for the general public. Maybe that's kind of all together, even though this one only got 2 votes and this one got 8 votes. I was just trying to do a few notes like that.
What is the differentiation between 15 and 17?
So 15, if you look at there was a lot more detail in this, if you guys remember. If you look at 15 talked about kind of the interactive tools for, individuals. It talked about, teaching, doing better parenting. So it's at that very basic individual level. The community education was kind of bigger level, not one-on-one kind of educational efforts. And there's some cross-pollination. So I'm feeling like, it's hard work, right? Do we want to vote? Do we want to re-vote to see if some of them bubble up and have an additional conversation about what we do with those strategies and what we give back to council besides some changes to public good order? Is this group willing to do that? That would mean an additional meeting that gets us into process for public good order and what are we going to do with these strategies? I would say at least one more. Yes, Al?
I think it goes a long way with even our credibility coming out of this and the recommendation that we're making. If we say, here's the recommendation that we're making, here are some primary issues that we've identified, such as the safe ride homes. I love hearing the conversation about that. Not only are we providing this recommendation, we're willing to help work on finding solutions for these areas that we have concern.
Mm-hmm. I think it does, as Al said, it also reinforces that this ordinance is not a magic bullet, right? And I think I heard a lot of the feedback like, why this? Do you really think this is going to change, the alcohol culture in the community? And I think this group saying, no, it's one tool in the toolbox. Again, a lot of people have said that. So I'm hearing at least some support for spending a little bit more time here. I know it's hard, so I want to acknowledge that. Zach, yeah? Okay.
Time right now, or like?
No, not today. Yeah, you're going to stay till 9 o'clock tonight. I have my voice back, so I can just keep talking. No, not today. It's way too nice out. Dave's like, get me out of here. No. Okay, so do people have sufficient time right now to reflect a little bit more on strategies and vote again? Or do we want to hold that till the next meeting to just say, all right, let's take a pause, let's look at what we have, think about it a little bit more, and know that next time we're going to vote and then spend some time digging deep. What's people's preference? Yes, Celine?
Is there a way to do a weighted vote? Like if it only has a 1 or a 2, can we just pull it off the wall? Because it really didn't. It's
We
a
can.
weighted vote.
Absolutely. Yep. We can say
no
anything.
offense to whoever voted for 15 and.
No, but 1s and 2s could be gone and we could only vote on other things.
And
Absolutely.
There are a few that could be
Combined.
They're the same.
That was what I was hoping that we would have a little bit of that conversation before we voted next. And that could be the start of the next meeting, yes,
Or it could be sent out
in advance.
in advance, doing some electronic voting, doing some of that condensing. You guys vote in between, and then we have something to work from at the next meeting.
I think that's a wise way to do it.
But
Okay.
that's not gonna change this ordinance, it's just for the next base. the next step.
Yeah, not related to the ordinance.
Bus, or some transportation, buses.
I don't mean to be, maybe I just don't get it. Nothing's changed with the bus.
No,
I
I
can
know,
show
but
up in front of.
if he doesn't do it.
Who's he? Tom?
Yeah. He hasn't been doing it lately. I mean, there's gonna be concerns from, especially from the students, if we don't have ample way to get them home or to replace the bus. And he has some current concerns that he needs to talk through with other people too, or we need to find what his.
Someone else.
issue are.
Yep, yeah.
My big concern is when the next bus comes up, or a student gets ambitious and does it, and the noise is still there, which is why I thought this whole thing started. It's, nothing, the ordinance hasn't helped it, right?
Except for the,
Uninvited
again,
guest.
uninvited guest, very specifically.
Yeah, it's a private company.
Uninvited guests from 9 p.m.
The way it's written now, and I think that's an important thing but yes, it's the uninvited guests during those time
But
frames.
it's a private company, so I think we can't influence
Who does and who doesn't?
who does or who doesn't. The only influence would be to set up something, through the university or through another group that was publicly funded or funded through a different stream, so I don't.
As a possibility, although I would push back and say, you guys have lots of influence in talking to people and encouraging the opportunity to start a company. Yeah. I mean, it isn't, you're right, we're not going to force someone to do it, but I think the concern raised by Dave is that if we don't have that kind of a opportunity to get people home safely, it's a problem for this community that we want to pay attention to. So how do people get home safely is an important concept for students and non-students alike. And are there sufficient strategies to do that? Whether it's Uber or something else, I think you guys mentioned. Okay? So I'm hearing the group get a feel that, yes, we want to continue to have a conversation. There will be another meeting. There's plenty to talk about around next steps related to the ordinance, but also next steps related to the bigger picture that are critically important. Yes? Thank you, guys. So, one word conclusion for today, besides exhausted, that'll be my word. It's not bad to be exhausted, because that means you worked hard, but since I picked on Katie last time, I'm going to pick on Chad this time. One word. Wow. If you want to share. Wow. Okay, you don't have to share. Any other one words from that table?
Tough.
Tough. Yeah. Closer. All right. Any other words? No? All right. You guys, any words? Accomplishing. Productive. Slow. Yeah. It's processes. Process is hard, right? Wouldn't it be easy if it was just you don't have to do process. You could just get it done. But your guys's. One word. And. I'm sorry? Climbing. Anybody else? All right, my words for you are thank you. Get outside, and we'll set another meeting date and get it out to you shortly.
Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.